Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's dawn and watched the massive space station grow larger on the main screen. The structure was unlike anything humans had ever built, stretching for miles in every direction, with towers that sparkled like crystal in the light of distant stars. This was the home of the Galactic Council, and today would mark humanity's first official meeting with the rulers of the galaxy. Drive Lisa Grant moved beside him, her eyes wide with wonder as she studied the alien architecture through her scanner. She had spent years preparing for this moment, learning everything she could about the 12 species that made up the Council. Behind them, Commander Rick Stone checked his weapon systems one final time, though he hoped they would not be needed. During what was supposed to be a peaceful diplomatic mission, the communication system crackled to life, and a voice spoke in perfect English, though there was something strange about the way the words formed. "Earth vessel, you are cleared to dock at Bay 7. Prepare for standard scanning procedures upon arrival." Jake nodded to his pilot, Amy Rodriguez, who guided their ship toward the designated docking port with steady hands. She had flown through asteroid fields and solar storms, but nothing had prepared her for the sight of ships from dozens of different worlds, all gathered in one place. Some were sleek and silver, others looked like they were grown rather than built, and a few seemed to be made of pure energy contained in metal frameworks. As they approached the docking bay, Jake noticed something odd about the other ships. They all moved in perfect formation, following precise patterns that seemed almost too coordinated to be natural. There were no bumps or minor course corrections that he would expect from living pilots. Making small mistakes, the docking procedure went smoothly, and soon the human delegation was walking through corridors filled with beings they had only seen in pictures before. The Mokari looked like tall, thin trees with silver bark and glowing blue leaves instead of hair. The crystalline beings were exactly what their name suggested, walking formations of living crystal that chimed softly as they moved. Most impressive were the Zephyrians, humanoid creatures with pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to look right through anyone they focused on. A Zephyrian approached them as they entered the main reception area. He wore robes that shifted color like oil on water, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to come from inside their heads rather than from his mouth. "Welcome, humans. I am High Reader Velthar. Before you can meet with the Council, we must complete the standard mental assessment. This is required of all new species for the safety and peace of the galactic community." Dr. Grant stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overcoming her caution. "What exactly does this assessment involve?" Velthar's large eyes fixed on her, and Jake felt a strange pressure building behind his forehead, like the beginning of a headache. "We simply scan your thoughts to understand your intentions and evaluate any potential threats you might pose. It is completely safe and has been performed on every species that has joined our community for over 3,000 years." The pressure in Jake's head grew stronger, and he could see his crew members beginning to look uncomfortable. Commander Stone's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, while Amy Rodriguez blinked rapidly as if trying to clear her vision. Drive Grant clutched her scanner tighter and took a step backward. But instead of the expected invasion of their minds that Velthar was clearly attempting, something unexpected happened. The pressure simply stopped, as if it had hit an invisible wall. The Zephyrian's eyes widened in surprise, and he took a step back himself. "Impossible," Velthar whispered, his mental voice carrying a note of confusion that hadn't been there before. He tried again, his forehead creasing with concentration, but the result was the same. Whatever barriers existed in human minds, they were completely impervious to his telepathic abilities. Jake felt the change in the room immediately. Other aliens, who had been going about their business, stopped and turned to stare at the human delegation. Whispered conversations began in languages he couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. These beings were afraid. "Perhaps," Jake said carefully, "we could discuss this assessment later, after we've had a chance to rest from our journey." But Velthar was already backing away, his mental voice broadcasting to others of his kind in rapid, urgent thoughts that the humans could sense but not understand. Within minutes, more Zephyrians had arrived, along with representatives from several other council species. An enormous creature that looked like a walking mountain of red stone approached them. This was clearly one of the crystalline hegemony leaders, and when it spoke, its voice rumbled like distant thunder. The Zephyrians report that your minds cannot be read. In 3,000 years of galactic civilization, this has never occurred. You will remain here while we investigate this anomaly. Jake looked at his crew and saw the same realization in their eyes that he felt in his heart. They had come here as diplomats seeking membership in a galactic community. Instead, they had discovered that their most human trait, their chaotic and individual thoughts, made them something the galaxy had never encountered before. Whether this would prove to be humanity's greatest strength or lead to their destruction remained to be seen. The first contact protocols had failed before they had even truly begun. Admiral Beth Carter received the emergency transmission while her fleet was still 3 days away. From the Council station, the message was brief and encrypted, but the meaning was clear. The diplomatic mission had failed, and her people were being held against their will. She ordered her ships to increase speed and began preparing for the worst possible scenario. Back on the Council station, Captain Jake Morrison and his crew found themselves in what their captors politely called guest quarters, though the locked doors and armed guards made their true situation obvious. The rooms were comfortable enough, with food and water provided regularly, but they were prisoners in all but name. Drive Lisa Grant spent her time studying the data she had managed to collect. Before their confinement, the Council's public records were available through the room's computer system, and what she discovered made her increasingly uncomfortable. Every species that had joined the galactic community showed the same pattern. Initial contact, mental assessment by the Zephyrians, a brief period of adjustment, and then peaceful integration with no further conflicts or disagreements. "It's too perfect," she told Jake as they sat in what passed for their common area. "Look at these records. The Mokari were a warrior species known for their fierce independence. But after joining the Council, they became philosophers and teachers. The hegemony used to be nomadic traders who fought constantly over territory. But now they're stable administrators who never argue with Council decisions." Commander Rick Stone looked up from where he had been testing the strength of their cell walls. "You think they're being controlled somehow?" Lisa nodded grimly. "I think the Zephyrians don't just read minds. I think they change them." Meanwhile, engineer Pete Williams had been working on their communication array, using parts he claimed were for routine maintenance of their ship. The guards didn't understand human technology well enough to realize he was actually building a way to send messages past their monitoring systems. His partner in this effort was pilot Amy Rodriguez, who had memorized the guard rotation patterns and could provide the few minutes of privacy he needed for each modification. Their breakthrough came when Pete discovered that human thoughts seemed to create a kind of static that interfered with Zephyrian monitoring equipment. By thinking intensely about random memories while he worked, he could mask the electronic signatures of his modifications. Amy tested their new system by sending a single word toward the approaching human fleet. "Trapped." The response came back within hours, also just one word: "Understood." High Reader Velthar visited them regularly, each time attempting to penetrate their mental defenses with growing frustration. He brought different Zephyrians with him, including their most powerful mind readers, but the result was always the same. Human consciousness remained as impenetrable as a solid wall. "Your minds are chaos," he told them during one of these visits, his mental voice carrying a mixture of disgust and fascination. "We sense layer upon layer of conflicting thoughts, random memories surfacing without purpose, emotions that change from moment to moment. How do you function with such disorder in your heads?" Jake smiled at what he realized was meant as an insult. "We call it creativity. It is dangerous." Velthar responded, "In a peaceful society, all minds must work in harmony. Individual chaos leads to conflict, and conflict leads to suffering." Dr. Grant leaned forward, her scientific mind engaged despite their circumstances. "But what about growth? What about progress? What about the spark of new ideas that comes from different perspectives colliding?" The Zephyrians' large eyes narrowed. "Progress is not worth the cost of war. New ideas are not worth the pain of disagreement. We have brought 3,000 years of peace to this galaxy, By ensuring that all species think clearly and rationally. You mean by making them all think the same way, Lisa said quietly. When Admiral Carter finally arrived, she came not with weapons blazing, but with a diplomatic proposal. She requested a formal meeting with the full council, offering to discuss humanity's unique mental structure and find a way for both sides to coexist peacefully. The council chambers were vast, with representatives from all 12 species arranged in a circle round the center where the human delegation stood. Each species had their own section, but Jake noticed that the Zephyrians sat in the position of highest honor, and their thoughts seemed to flow constantly among the other representatives. Council leader Throndak, a massive crystalline being, whose body was shot through with veins of gold, spoke for the assembled aliens. Humans, your minds cannot be read by our peacekeepers. This creates an unacceptable security risk for our community. We are prepared to offer you limited membership in our civilization, but only if you submit to mental modification that will make you compatible with our systems. Admiral Carter stood tall, her military bearing evident even in the face of beings who could destroy Earth with a thought. We appreciate your offer, but we must decline any procedure that would alter our natural mental state. We propose instead a period of observation, during which we can demonstrate that human unpredictability is not a threat to galactic peace. The response from the council was swift and unanimous. Humanity would be quarantined to their home system while the council debated their fate. Any attempt to leave human space or to contact other species would be considered an act of war. As the human delegation was escorted back to their ship, Jake caught sight of something that gave him hope. A Mokari keeper in the back of the chambers had been watching the proceedings with what looked like approval in his ancient eyes. For just a moment, their gazes met, and Jake could swear he saw the alien nod slightly. Admiral Carter's fleet formed up around Earth's dawn as they began their journey home, but Jake knew this was far from over. They had learned something important about the galaxy they thought they wanted to join. It was a prison disguised as paradise, where peace was maintained through mental slavery. The question now was whether humanity would fight for their right to remain free, or submit to having their minds reshaped to fit into someone else's idea of perfection. Given what Jake knew about human nature, he suspected the answer was already decided. The return journey to Earth took longer than expected, because Admiral Beth Carter decided to take a detour that would change everything. Acting on Captain Jake Morrison's hunch about the Mokari keeper who had watched their trial, she ordered her fleet to make an unscheduled stop at a mining station on the edge of Council space. The station appeared abandoned at first glance, its ancient metal corridors dark and filled with the sound of failing life support systems. But Jake knew better than to trust appearances after what they had learned about the Council's methods of control. He led a small team including Dr. Lisa Grant and Commander Rick Stone through the maze of tunnels. Following energy readings that suggested someone was still living here, they found the Mokari keeper Jareth in what had once been the station's central power core, now converted into a kind of meditation chamber filled with strange crystals that hummed with their own inner light. The alien looked even older up close, his bark-like skin covered in deep grooves that spoke of centuries of life. But his blue glowing eyes were alert and intelligent. "I hoped you would come," Jareth said, his voice like wind through autumn leaves. Your minds sang differently in the council chamber, and I recognized the sound of true freedom. Drive Grant stepped forward, her scanner detecting energy patterns she had never seen before. "You're shielding your thoughts somehow, aren't you?" The ancient Mokari nodded slowly. "My people were once warriors and poets, creators of beauty and fighters for justice, but the Zephyrians changed us, made us passive and compliant. Most of my kind don't even remember what we used to be, but a few of us have learned to hide our true thoughts behind layers of false compliance." Jake felt excitement building in his chest. "How many others are there?" "More than you might think. Fewer than we need," Jareth replied. "The hegemony has 3 mining families who remember their nomadic heritage. The Spiral Collective has a group of engineers who still dream of building ships that explore instead of just maintaining what already exists. Even some Zephyrians have begun to question their role as thought police." Commander Stone remained skeptical. "If you've been hiding for so long, Why reveal yourselves now? Jareth's glowing eyes fixed on the human soldier with something that might have been amusement. Because until now, we thought we were the only ones who could resist. Your rival has shown us that natural mental freedom is possible, not just hidden rebellion. Over the following weeks, the mining station became a secret meeting place for what they began calling the Underground Network. Representatives from 6 different species made dangerous journeys to meet with the human delegatio and learn about mental techniques that had never occurred to them. Dr. Grant discovered that different species had developed different types of resistance. The Mokari used meditation to create false mental layers that looked compliant on the surface, while hiding their true thoughts beneath. The hegemony miners had learned to think in mathematical equations that Zephyrian minds found difficult to interpret. The Spiral Collective engineers thought in complex technical blueprints that were too chaotic for telepathic reading, but it was Commander Stone who made the breakthrough that changed everything. During training sessions with volunteers from different species, he began teaching them human meditation techniques, combined with military mental discipline exercises. The results were remarkable. A young hegemony crystal being named Quarth was the first to achieve what they called human-style mental chaos. Instead of thinking in the ordered, predictable patterns that his species was known for, he learned to let his mind jump randomly between memories, emotions, and abstract concepts. Within days, he became completely unreadable to Zephyrian telepaths. It's like learning to think in music instead of words, Quarth explained, his crystal body chiming with excitement. My thoughts bounce around like notes in a symphony, and the Zephyrians can't follow the melody. Dr. Grant documented everything they learned, building a database of mental techniques that could potentially free the entire galaxy. But she also made a disturbing discovery while analyzing the Council's historical records. That Jareth had managed to access, the peaceful galactic civilization, is built on systematic mental lobotomy. She told Jake during one of their planning sessions. The Zephyrians identify the parts of each species' consciousness that lead to creativity, independence, and conflict. Then they surgically remove those mental patterns. What's left behind looks like the original species, but lacks any capacity for growth or change. Engineer Pete Williams had been working on a different problem entirely. By studying the energy patterns of Zephyrian telepathy, he had discovered that their power was not unlimited. They used a kind of psychic amplifier that boosted their natural abilities across galactic distances. And this amplifier had a physical location that could potentially be targeted. It's built into their home world, Pete explained as he showed his findings to the group. The entire planet has been converted into a massive broadcasting station that sends their mental influence to every corner of Council space. Amy Rodriguez, who had been serving as their liaison with different rebel groups, brought news that was both encouraging and terrifying. The network is growing faster than we expected. Word is spreading through hidden channels that humans can teach mental freedom, but the Zephyrians are starting to notice the changes. The confirmation of their fears came when 3 members of their network simply disappeared. Jareth received word that they had been taken for mental health evaluation and returned days later as perfect, compliant citizens with no memory of their time in the rebellion. We're running out of time, Jake told Admiral Carter during one of their encrypted communications. Either we act soon, or the Zephyrians will eliminate everyone who's learned to think freely. The Admiral's response was grim, but not unexpected. Earth's governments are divided. Some want to negotiate with the Council, others want to prepare for war, but there's something else you need to know. Our deep space monitors have detected massive fleet movements in Council space. Ships from all 12 species are gathering near the border of human territory. Jareth confirmed their worst fears during their next meeting. The Council has decided that humanity represents an existential threat to their system. They're planning to either force mental compliance on your entire species or eliminate you entirely. As Jake looked around the mining station at the small group of rebels who had risked everything for the chance to think freely, he realized that the choice was no longer about whether humanity would join galactic civilization. It was about whether any species would ever be allowed to maintain their mental independence again. The underground network had grown from a desperate hope into something that might actually have a chance of success, but only if they were willing to risk everything. In a final gamble for freedom, pilot Amy Rodriguez had always been good at getting into places where she didn't belong, but infiltrating the central archives of the Council Station was by far her most dangerous mission. Using identification cards that engineer Pete Williams had managed to copy during their original diplomatic visit, she made her way through corridors filled with the most sensitive information in the galaxy. The archives were vast beyond imagination, with data crystals containing the complete history of 3,000 years of galactic civilization. But Amy wasn't looking for history lessons. She was searching for the records that would prove what Dr. Lisa Grant suspected about the true nature of Council peace. What she found was worse than any of them had imagined. The files contained detailed records of what the Council called mental harmonization procedures performed on every species that had ever joined their civilization. Each entry included before and after brain scans showing exactly which parts of alien consciousness had been removed or modified. The Mokari had lost their capacity for righteous anger. The hegemony had been stripped of their desire to explore and expand. The Spiral Collective had been robbed of their innovative thinking. But the most horrifying discovery was a series of files labeled extinction events. These contained records of 17 different species that had proven too resistant to mental modification. Rather than allow them to remain independent, the Council had systematically eliminated them, erasing all trace of their existence from galactic memory. Amy copied everything she could carry and made her escape just as Zephyrian security forces began searching for the intruder they had detected but could not identify. Her human mind remained invisible to their telepathic sweeps, allowing her to walk past guards who were looking directly at her while searching for someone whose thoughts they could read. When she returned to the mining station with her stolen data, the revelation sent shockwaves through the underground network. Captain Jake Morrison stared at the evidence of genocide with a mixture of horror and determination, while Commander Rick Stone began immediately updating their tactical plans. Dr. Grant analyzed the data with scientific precision, but Jake could see the emotional impact it had on her. 17 species, she whispered. Billions of individual beings who died simply because they refused to give up their mental freedom. Jar-F's reaction was different, but equally intense. The ancient Makari's bark-like skin darkened to almost black, and his blue eyes flared with an anger that Jake suspected hadn't been seen from his species in centuries. "My people were poets," Jar-F said, his voice carrying a pain that seemed to echo through the station's metal walls. "We created beauty that could make stars weep with joy, and they took that away from us. They made us forget our own songs." The stolen files also revealed something else that changed their entire understanding of the situation. The Zephyrians weren't just maintaining their mental control network, they were expanding it. Plans existed for something called Project Deep Peace, which would extend their telepathic influence beyond Council space to affect every species in the galaxy, whether they were members or not. Pete Williams studied the technical specifications. With growing alarm, they're building amplifier stations throughout the galaxy. He explained to the assembled rebels, once these are active, no species anywhere will be able to maintain mental independence. Even if we hid in the farthest corners of space, their influence would eventually reach us. Admiral Beth Carter's response to this news was swift and decisive. She transmitted new orders to Earth's dawn and began moving human military assets into position for what everyone now understood would be an inevitable conflict. But before any military action could be taken, Jake decided on a desperate diplomatic gambit. He requested a direct meeting with High Reader Velthar, hoping that confronting the Zephyrian leader with evidence of their crimes might somehow lead to a peaceful resolution. The meeting took place in the same chambers where humanity had first been declared a threat to galactic peace. But this time, Jake came with evidence that the peace itself was a lie built on mass murder and mental slavery. Velthar examined the stolen files with the same calm demeanor he had maintained throughout their previous encounters, but Jake could sense something different in the Zephyrians' mental presence. There was a tension there that hadn't existed before. "These records are classified for good reason," Velthar finally said. The decisions contained in these files were made by wiser minds than yours, after careful consideration of the greater good. Jake leaned forward, his human emotions creating the mental static that he now knew made Zephyrians uncomfortable. You killed entire species because they wouldn't let you control their thoughts. We prevented wars that would have killed far more, Velthar replied. But there was something defensive in his mental voice now. The 17 resistant species you found records of were all aggressive, expansionist cultures that would have brought nothing but suffering to the galaxy. Their elimination saved countless lives. Their elimination was murder, Jake said flatly. For the first time since they had met, Velthar showed genuine emotion. His large dark eyes flared with something that might have been anger or perhaps fear. You think your chaos is better than our peace, the Zephyrian said. You think your wars and conflicts and individual suffering are preferable to the harmony we have created, but you don't understand the price of freedom. You don't know what happens when minds are allowed to follow their own paths without guidance. Drive Grant, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. What about the price of slavery? What about the cost of turning entire species into shadows of what they used to be? Better shadows than corpses, Velthar responded immediately. Better compliance than the rivers of blood that flow when species are allowed to maintain their natural aggression and territorial instincts. The philosophical debate that followed revealed something that surprised Jake. Velthar genuinely believed that what the Zephyrians had done was not just necessary, but morally correct. In his mind, the forced mental modification of entire species was a small price to pay for galactic peace. But as their conversation continued, Jake began to realize that there was something else behind the Zephyrians' convictions. Fear. Velthar and his people were terrified of what would happen if their control system ever collapsed. Your own species was nearly destroyed by internal conflict before you developed telepathy, Jake said, reading between the lines of what Velthar had revealed. You're not just controlling other species to maintain peace. You're controlling them because you're afraid of what happened to you. The silence that followed was the loudest sound Jake had ever heard. When Velthar finally responded, his mental voice was barely a whisper. Our homeworld still bears the scars of the wars we fought before we learned to share thoughts and eliminate disagreement. Mountains of glass where cities used to stand, oceans turned to steam. Continents cracked open by weapons that should never have been built. We swore that no species would ever suffer as we did. So you decided to make that choice for everyone else, Jake said quietly. The meeting ended with no resolution. But Jake understood now that they were not fighting monsters. They were fighting people who had been so traumatized by their own history that they couldn't see the difference between peace and oppression. That understanding didn't change what had to be done, but it made the coming conflict even more tragic than Jake had realized. Engineer Pete Williams stood before a holographic display showing the Zephyrian homeworld, its surface covered with the massive crystalline structures that formed their psychic amplification network. The technical data that pilot Amy Rodriguez had stolen revealed not just the location of the system's power source, but also its one critical weakness. The entire network is connected. Pete explained to the assembled leaders of the underground network, if we can destroy the central amplifier core, it will create a cascade failure that will shut down telepathic control across the entire galaxy. Captain Jake Morrison studied the tactical implications while Commander Rick Stone calculated what kind of force would be needed to penetrate the defenses around the Zephyrian homeworld. Both men came to the same conclusion. It would be a suicide mission with almost no chance of success. Dr. Lisa Grant had been analyzing a different aspect of the stolen data, focusing on the biological effects of sudden mental liberation. If we destroy the amplifier, billions of beings across the galaxy will suddenly regain thought patterns and emotions that have been suppressed for generations. The psychological shock alone could kill millions. Jareth, the ancient Mokari keeper, who had become their most valuable ally, moved slowly among the holographic displays. His bark-like skin had grown even darker since learning the full truth about what had been done to his people, and his blue eyes held a sadness that seemed to encompass centuries of lost culture. My people have forgotten how to feel anger, he said quietly, "If that emotion returns suddenly, without the wisdom that should temper it, many will not survive the experience." The debate that followed split the underground network down the middle. Half of their allies, led by the hegemony crystal beings, argued for a surgical approach that would disable only portions of the network, allowing for gradual mental liberation. The other half, including most of the Spiral Collective engineers, demanded complete destruction of the system, regardless of the consequences. Jake found himself caught between two impossible choices, each with the potential for massive loss of life: destroy the amplifier and free the galaxy at the cost of psychological chaos that might kill billions, leave it intact and condemn every species to eternal mental slavery under Zephyrian control. The decision was complicated further when Amy Rodriguez returned from a reconnaissance mission with news that changed everything. "The Council fleet isn't just moving toward human space," she reported. "They're heading directly for Earth." Admiral Beth Carter confirmed this through encrypted communications. From the advancing human fleet, long-range sensors show over 3,000 ships from all 12 Council species. This isn't a diplomatic mission or a show of force. This is an invasion fleet designed to either conquer or destroy our home world. Commander Stone immediately shifted into military planning mode. "We need to warn Earth and begin evacuation procedures for non-essential populations." But Dr. Grant had been studying the timeline of the Council's movements, and what she discovered was even more troubling. They're not just planning to attack Earth. Look at these fleet positions. They're surrounding every human colony, every research station, every ship in space. This is a coordinated attempt to eliminate our entire species. The realization hit Jake like a physical blow. Humanity faced the same fate as the 17 species that had been erased from galactic memory. The Council had decided that mental freedom was too dangerous to be allowed to exist anywhere in the universe. Jareth broke the stunned silence that followed this revelation. "Then the choice is made for us. We cannot save lives by preserving a system that has decided to commit genocide." Pete Williams began updating his technical plans immediately. "We'll need to coordinate the attack on the amplifier with defensive actions around Earth. If we can time it right, the sudden loss of mental control might disrupt the Council fleet's coordination just 1 hour. People need it most. The logistics of organizing such an operation seemed impossible until an unexpected ally emerged. A group of Zephyrians led by a young telepath named Kreshtar contacted them through channels so secret that even Jake wasn't sure how they had been established. "Not all of my people agree with the Council's decisions," Kreshtar explained during a clandestine meeting. "Some of us remember our history differently than the leaders do. We see the scars on our home world not as proof that freedom is dangerous, but as evidence of what happens when fear controls decision-making." The rebel Zephyrians brought something invaluable to the cause: detailed knowledge of their homeworld's defenses and the exact location of the amplifier's most vulnerable components. But they also brought troubling news about the scope of Project Deep Peace. "The network is almost complete," Kreshtar revealed. "In less than 1 cycle, they will be able to extend mental control beyond the galaxy itself. Every species in the known universe will be subject to our influence, whether they resist or not." Amy Rodriguez volunteered immediately for the assault mission, her experience infiltrating the Council archives making her the obvious choice for getting past Zephyrian security systems. Pete Williams would accompany her to handle the technical aspects of destroying the amplifier, while a mixed team of rebels from different species would create diversions to draw attention away from their primary objective. Jake faced the hardest decision of his life when Admiral Carter asked him to choose between leading the assault on the amplifier or returning to Earth to help coordinate the defense of humanity's homeworld. Both missions were critical, both needed experienced leadership, and failure at either location would doom not just humanity, but every species in the galaxy. Commander Stone made the choice for him. "You're needed on Earth," he told Jake quietly. "Your people will need to see their leaders standing with them when the Council fleet arrives. I'll take the assault team to the Zephyrian homeworld." Dr. Grant would split her time between both missions, analyzing the psychological effects of mental liberation. while also developing strategies to help Earth's defenders maintain their sanity during what would undoubtedly be the most chaotic battle in human history. As the underground network prepared for their desperate gamble, Jareth shared something that gave them all hope. "My people have a saying that was old when the galaxy was young. The tree that bends in the storm survives, but the tree that stands straight reaches the sky. You humans have taught us that sometimes survival is not enough." Jake looked around at the assembled representatives of 6 different species, all of whom were about to risk everything for a chance at mental freedom. The irony wasn't lost on him that the most diverse group in galactic history had come together to fight against forced unity. "Whether we succeed or fail," he told them, "the galaxy will never be the same. We've proven that resistance is possible, that mental freedom can spread, that the Council's perfect peace is actually brittle oppression." The final preparations began immediately. Ships were loaded with weapons and supplies, communication networks were established across vast distances, and final goodbyes were said by people who knew they might not survive to see the results of their actions. The battle for the future of consciousness itself was about to begin. The Council fleet emerged from hyperspace around Earth like a storm of metal and energy that blotted out the stars. 3,000 ships representing 12 different species moved in perfect formation, their coordination so precise that it looked more like a single massive organism than a collection of individual vessels. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's dawn, now serving as Admiral Beth Carter's flagship, and watched humanity's homeworld prepare for the most desperate battle in their species' history. Earth's defense fleet numbered barely 300 ships, outnumbered 10 to 1 by an enemy that had never known defeat. But Jake had learned something about humanity during their encounters with the Council that gave him hope. Humans had never been good at following predictable patterns, and today that chaos would either save them or destroy them completely. "All ships, maintain random movement patterns," Admiral Carter ordered over the communication network. "Do not fall into formation. Do not coordinate your attacks. Do not do anything that the enemy can predict or counter." Commander Rick Stone was 50 light-years away, leading the assault team toward the Zephyrian homeworld in a modified mining vessel that looked like debris, but carried the most important mission in galactic history. Engineer Pete Williams had spent days preparing the specialized weapons they would need to destroy the psychic amplifier, while pilot Amy Rodriguez planned escape routes that relied on the same mental invisibility that had gotten her into the Council archives. Dr. Lisa Grant monitored both battles from her position on Earth's dawn, tracking the psychological effects of the conflict on both human and alien minds. What she saw confirmed her theories about the fundamental differences between species that had evolved mental freedom and those that had been forced into compliance. The Council fleet moved like a machine, every ship responding instantly to commands from the Zephyrian telepaths who coordinated their actions. But this perfect coordination also meant that when human ships did something unexpected, the entire enemy formation had to adjust, creating brief moments of vulnerability. "Target their command ships," Jake ordered, watching as a group of human destroyers broke away from the main battle and dove toward the center of the Council formation. "If we can disrupt their telepathic coordination, their advantage disappears." The first phase of the battle went exactly as everyone had expected. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable, but Council vessels had better shields and weapons. The exchange rate was devastating, with humanity losing to ships for every enemy vessel they destroyed. But then something unexpected happened that changed everything on the Zephyrian homeworld. Commander Stone's assault team had successfully penetrated the outer defenses and was making their way toward the central amplifier. As they fought through corridors filled with telepathic guardians, Pete Williams discovered that the amplifier network was even more vulnerable than they had realized. "It's not just connected to the Zephyrian homeworld," he reported over their encrypted communication channel. "It's connected to every Zephyrian in the galaxy. If we destroy this, it's going to feed back through their entire species." Amy Rodriguez was already at the amplifier core, her hands moving over alien control systems that she barely understood. "Then we better make this count." The explosion that followed was visible from space as a column of psychic energy that tore through the Zephyrian homeworld's atmosphere. But the real effects were felt across the galaxy as 3,000 years of mental control suddenly vanished in an instant dot in the space around Earth. The perfectly coordinated Council fleet suddenly became 3,000 individual ships whose pilots had forgotten how to work together. Zephyrian telepaths screamed in pain as the feedback from their destroyed network overloaded their minds, leaving them unable to coordinate the massive battle they had started. But Dr. Grant's predictions about the psychological effects of sudden liberation proved accurate in ways that no one had fully anticipated. Across the galaxy, billions of beings suddenly remembered emotions and thoughts that had been suppressed for generations. On Mokari worlds, ancient warrior poets began composing battle songs that hadn't been heard for centuries. In hegemony space, nomadic crystal beings abandoned their administrative posts and began building ships to explore the unknown regions beyond the galaxy. The Spiral Collective engineers started designing impossible machines that existed only in their wildest dreams. The chaos was immediate and overwhelming, but it was also beautiful in a way that Jake had never imagined possible. In the battle round Earth, Council ships began breaking formation as their crews rediscovered individual thought and personal ambition. Some continued fighting, but others simply stopped, their pilots too overwhelmed by newfound mental freedom to remember why they had come to destroy humanity. A few ships actually switched sides, their crews deciding that any species capable of teaching mental liberation deserved their protection rather than their destruction. Jake watched a Mokari vessel move alongside Earth's dawn and begin firing on its former allies. The communication from their captain was brief but meaningful. "Thank you for reminding us who we used to be." The battle that had seemed hopeless suddenly became winnable as the Council fleet fell apart from within, but victory came with a price that sobered everyone who witnessed it. Commander Stone's assault team had succeeded in their mission, but none of them survived the destruction of the Amplifier network. Pete Williams and Amy Rodriguez died as heroes, giving their lives to free a galaxy from mental slavery. High Reader Velthar was among the Zephyrian telepaths who survived the feedback, but he was forever changed by the experience. When Jake met with him after the battle, the alien leader seemed smaller somehow, more vulnerable. "We were wrong," Velthar said simply. "We let our fear of chaos blind us to the beauty of individual thought. But the price of our mistake has been paid by billions of beings across the galaxy." Dr. Grant spent months documenting the aftermath of galactic mental liberation. The chaos was real and devastating in many ways, with conflicts erupting as species rediscovered ancient grudges and territorial disputes. But alongside the violence came an explosion of creativity, innovation, and genuine cooperation that had been impossible under Zephyrian control. New alliances formed based on mutual interest, rather than forced compliance. Art and music that had been forgotten for millennia began flowing again. Scientific discoveries accelerated as minds that had been locked in rigid patterns suddenly became free to explore impossible ideas. Jake found himself appointed as the first director of the new Galactic Council, a voluntary organization where disagreement and debate were considered strengths rather than threats. His first official act was to establish the Memorial of Mental Freedom on the site where the Zephyrian Amplifier had once stood. The memorial bore the names of every being who had died fighting for the right to think freely, including the 17 species that had been erased from history by the old council. But it also contained a promise for the future, that no species would ever again be forced to choose between mental freedom and existence. Years later, Jake stood in a park on Earth and watched children from a dozen different species playing together. Their laughter created a kind of music that had never existed before, a symphony of individual voices that somehow harmonized without losing their distinctiveness. A young human girl ran up to him, followed by her friends, a Mokari child whose bark skin glowed with excitement, a tiny hegemony crystal being that chimed like bells, and a Zephyrian youth whose large eyes sparkled with curiosity rather than the cold control that had once defined his species. "Tell us the story again," the human girl demanded. "Tell us about the humans who couldn't be controlled." Jake smiled and began the tale that had become legend across the galaxy. The story of how chaos had conquered order, how individual thought had defeated collective control, and how the most unpredictable species in the universe had taught everyone else that freedom was worth any price. The human mind, chaotic and ungovernable, had indeed proven to be something that no council could ever truly control.